Recording. Lovely. So, welcome, David Charalambous, to Wise Women Weekdays. How are you, David? It's been a while.
I am really well, thank you, Karen. Yes,
It's good to
good
see
to
you.
see you.
I know we sort of hooked up at the beginning, 5 years ago, crumbs, half a decade. And then everybody sort of ran around doing their thing. And I haven't spoken to you for some time. And I know you've been involved in lots of stuff. You've gone deeper. And just our pre-record, you said, "What do you want to talk about? How about cults?" And I said, "Yes, let's press the button now." So before we miss any of these golden nuggets, David, tell us what you've been doing. Tell us a little bit about your background first,
Yeah.
in case people don't know who you are.
Yes, so I spent over 25 years studying perception, psychology. I had the question, why do I do what I do? Why am I doing things that I don't want to do? Why do I feel compelled to do them? And I was fortunate in the early days because I was headhunted at 25, I think it was, to be a CIO. And I suddenly realized I didn't know anything about human behavior. I knew a lot about systems, but basically everyone in the boardroom was really clued up, political animals. So then I decided to, and I was in charge of the training budget. So I was able to put myself on loads of courses on psychology, NLP, all these other things. And I think that really spurred my desire to learn those things. So I've been learning them since. It all went a bit more important in March 2020 because at that particular point I considered myself to be pretty good at debating, having conversations, talking to people, and all of a sudden, like, something bizarre was going on. People were acting like they were possessed and coming up with all sorts of crazy ideas, and I don't watch the TV, so I wasn't aware of what was going into their minds. But that's taken us on a really deep journey in understanding behavioral science and all the related subjects of that. And really, to sum it up in a nutshell, what we've done is, me and some others, is we've gone through pretty much every book we could find on behavioral science, perception, and key ones from other fields. We've broken them down, all their component pieces, into like pieces of a puzzle, and then we put them back together to have a picture of human behavior. And it's startling. It's starting to see how people can be controlled, how people can be influenced, and it pretty much happens outside of their awareness. And once you become aware of it, obviously a lot of it just stops working dead in its tracks, but we still will be vulnerable to certain aspects of being influenced. So yeah,
And
that's where we are.
with the influencing of human behaviour, is this isn't necessarily just talking to somebody. This is coming at us from all angles. Is it? Is it through the newspapers, through the music, through the TV, through? Is that how you see it? Hello,
Yes.
doggy. Mine's just doing that as well.
This one is she's a beautiful little thing.
Oh, she's gorgeous. What's her name?
She's Bonnie. Go and sit down,
Bonnie.
Bonnie.
Bonnie Lass. Bonnie
Yes.
Lass. Bless her.
So yes,
Yeah.
what you've got is that you've got what is known as nudge units. Okay, and they're the behavioral insights teams. Now, if I would advise the viewers to do a internet search and search for document mindspace and government, and when they find that document, that will be one of the document, and that's not. I mean, there's ones far worse than that, but that's the most easy to read. Even though it will, everyone that's read that has then said they're angry because they didn't realize that's what the government was doing. And in that document, they've chose the nine, the nine simplest ways that they can give to their departments on how to and I think it's manipulation. They will say influence, but
Influence. Yeah.
basically the subtext of that document says influencing the public through influencing behavior through public policy. Now that should set some alarm bells going to start with. But then what you've got is you've got this sort of coordination between governments, institutions, corporations, the perfect meld of some really things that you should never do. And the behavioral insights teams are literally the way to sell this to the public. So then what you'll see is an orchestration through radio, media, messaging. You'll see, remember the Build Back Better. Okay. Literally
Three
for
words.
weeks. Yeah, for weeks you saw that everywhere. And in the book Europe, they talk about the 5 rules of propaganda, and one of them is orchestration. So you'll see orchestration. I mean, we've got a program now where we can throw an article through it and it will highlight all the different types of propaganda used. in that article. So, if there's anyone out there that wants to take up a project of doing propaganda watch, then they contact me. It's very interesting that when you know what you're looking for, then you'll see it everywhere. So basically what they do is they have this concept, and of course most of the people involved in it, they should know by now something's amiss. But a lot of them are just doing the job, getting paid, etc. They're not aware that this is coming down from a singular kind of strategy. So then what you'll see, and this is where it gets really interesting, there's a thing called narrative transportation theory, which is how they write these storylines into popular TV programs, knowing full well that it will change people's opinions and attitudes, but the people won't know that's what's changed them. For instance, they've done studies that people that read Harry Potter will be more tolerant to immigrants, etc., etc. So there's all these things that they know, and and some of these aren't necessarily bad, like the Harvard alcohol project. They got together with ABC Studios, and they put into many storylines through Cheers and Dallas and Dynasty the term designated driver. So of course you could argue, well, that's a fairly positive use of that. So then people, and then it's normal for somebody not to drink, because then you can just say, oh, I'm driving, and then you don't have the pressures, which is kind of crazy, because if you say I don't drink, everyone looks at you as though you're weird. I mean, and of course there's nothing wrong. Whatever anyone wants to do with their own time and money is, in my opinion, as long as it doesn't harm anyone else, that's their business. But of course what's going on is that a lot of the time these ideas are being planted into people's minds and they don't realize they're being planted there. Because I also think that the way we've been educated about how our brains work is, one, incorrect, and two, you've got to ask if that's been done maybe on purpose.
It's interesting. I was watching a movie on Netflix the other day. I don't watch telly, although Netflix is on a TV. But I like to watch something of an evening because it just takes my mind off, other stuff. And I think it was Palma or La Palma or something. It was when the a bit of the Canary Islands is going to drop and there's going to be a big tsunami and stuff like that. So I think that's what it was about, and it was really rubbish. It was really rubbish. It was a Norwegian version, and but they did mention climate change, and you can see it, like you say, once you know it's
Yeah.
there, and they, you might hear it in a record, or you'll see it in a book or something, and it's another version of designated driver, isn't it? They
Yes,
feed it.
it is. Now, what's really important about this, and I've tried to think about many ways to explain this, but you see, the foundations of thinking is actually associations itself, and there's plenty of studies on this. Get down, baby, go on. There's plenty of studies on this, but it's linking two things together. So basically, if I said to you, have a break, then most people, English people, go, oh, have a Kit Kat. So
Have a Kit Kat, yes.
yeah, so that's things been conditioned to link those two things together. And then that leads to a stereotyping, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just understand that a certain amount of this will be this, etc. When stereotypes are wrong, i.e. they're way away from reality, then they become problematic. Like some towns and cities, you'll know that there'll be a general amount of the population that will be funny and whatever. So we stereotyping is perfectly normal. But you see, what happens is that there's a thing called the implicit association test, and it can actually test those associations. Now, what happens is those associations become unconscious, but they form the basis of thinking. So I could challenge any of the viewers to go on any group on Facebook or whatever that claims to be science. So it'll be the darker side of science or whatever. Now, every other post will be vaccine or selling a product or whatever, and just politely question. Okay. And then what you're going to get is they're all going to laugh at your post, and they're going to abuse you. They're going to call you stupid. Then they're going to, all these things, which is literally just a conditioned response. I mean, we can predict, almost to an nth degree how they're going to respond. Now that person thinks they're responding from their true self, but it's not. They've been conditioned to respond that way. And that's why, Mark Twain said it's easier to fool someone than it is to convince them they've been fooled. To actually condition someone is far easier than to show them they've been conditioned. So it is quite challenging in that respect. But what you've got is, it's literally like, imagine that each of these associations is like a Lego block. So what they're doing is, through the course of years, is keep building up bit by bit all these concepts to the point where they're building a picture like this Lego thing in someone's mind, and then the person thinks that that picture in their mind is true, and then they respond from that position. Okay, but all the time, and it's literally, it's not, conditioning isn't a bad thing, it's how we learn. We learn by observing the world. The challenge or the problem we got now is that if you go back 2000 years ago, pretty much most people's map of the world, and we call it a map, is built from their experience. So it arguably is quite accurate, that touching fire is painful, etc., etc. But this is where it gets important, is that we develop the ability to tell stories, to share those experiences so the other person doesn't have to burn their hand. Okay, but the science is so well known now that they can tell stories with false bits of information that people won't know because they're absorbing the moral of the story unconsciously. Okay, so if the media shows pictures of a person doing bad things, the person's going to assume that person is bad. And if they show pictures of another person receiving an Oscar and all these accolades, then they go, oh, that's a good person. So generally you can predict from just watching the media what opinions people will have.
Is it, again, when you know what to look for, it becomes blatantly obvious, I guess, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Because you can, I did a project about 12 years ago where I went across 10 different corporate media articles all on the same subject, and then would look, what do they want me to believe? And it was effectively uniform. It's like, right, this is what we want them to believe. And they're so skilled in getting the person to believe that, because they don't say to you, we want you to believe this person's bad. They show you instances that lead you to that conclusion. You've only got to look at the filmmaking nowadays is so advanced that you watch a scene from a movie and you'll feel strong emotions towards the hero being positive, and you'll feel real strong negative emotions towards the villain. Okay. Now they haven't said feel these emotions. They've shown you pictures. So for instance, Jack Reacher. So they'll show you Jack Reacher walking into a town, getting off a bus, very big, strong man, and then a couple come out the store. Okay. The couple, there's a man and a woman, and the man's being very rude to the woman, and then it looks like he's going to get physical. So then Jack walks up and sort of steps in and saves the day. So of course you just have to watch that. You'll feel positive emotions towards Jack, and you'll feel negative emotions towards the other gentleman. Okay, run enough scenes of that through actors in the real world, and you can predict what people are going to feel. And that's the thing, because they're uniform across so many different channels, you've only got to be exposed to it for a while, and you don't actually get a chance to choose, to be honest, because you feel what. So for me, I love dogs. So when Jack, there's a man that's treating a dog badly and Jack goes in and gives him a good hiding, I feel good about that. That man deserved it and the dog's been saved. But it's just a story. It's pictures. It's not real.
Yes.
Makes sense. So this is the ability, and the brain is just doing what it does. And of course,
it affects your emotions. Yeah.
Yeah, it will. That's the whole point in going to watch a movie. People want to go see horror movies to be scared and all these things.
Yeah.
The challenge is now that they're not telling stories. They're now basically getting people to believe certain things. Yeah, the story is the vehicle to do that.
Well, two things, or lots of things come to mind as we're chatting here. One is MK Ultra. That's, I guess, part of an experiment that they've used all that, if people know about mind control. And also, as we went through the COVID years, was it Mockingbird they called it, where everybody's repeating, around the world.
That was like decades ago. Mockingbird.
Was it?
Yeah. So basically,
can you tell us more about Mockingbird? Was it where all the journalists on the news channels kept repeating the same thing?
Yeah, well, what it was, I think it was the CIA placed journalists within organizations, and therefore they had, they would feed them bits of information and told them the way to frame it. Now, one of the ways was the Iraqi war. The second one, I believe it was, that for the first time in history, they put journalists pretty much in the front line. So what you had was that most of the stories were literally from personal angles of the soldiers, and from these planted journalists, embedded journalists, I think what they call them. So of course, people don't bite the hand that feeds them, or certainly don't bite the hands that are protecting them. So they controlled the narrative around that. So hardly, I think it was only 2% of stories were around the WMDs and the fact that they weren't there. That
Yeah.
wasn't it. The focus was all on, winning the war. Oh, well, we've gone to war. Don't worry about that. So the media, I think it was Malcolm X that said the media is the greatest, has the greatest responsibility, isn't it? He said they can get you to love the villain and hate the hero. I don't think people realize just how true that is. The power of the media. I mean, the more and more I find out about these things, the more you realize they're the gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Now, what you
Yeah.
have is within the brain itself, there's also a gatekeeper, and it's known as the reticular activating system. So we just call it the RAS. Now, what the RAS is like the security guard at the front door. So it decides what information makes it into the mind. For instance, if you're at a party and there's 4 or 5 conversations going on, the minute someone mentions your name, you hear it. Okay? So what does that assume? Your brain must have been listening to all the conversations in order to pick that word up. So that security guard has gone, oh, someone's mentioned Karen, that might be interesting, it might be about me. So what they do is they get people to believe a certain thing, and what happens is the security guard at the door then filters information before it gets to the conscious mind. So basically, when they told people safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, that makes itself into the map, which the security guard then say, if there's an adverse reaction, then it's BS or whatever. And it's like, that logically doesn't make any sense because there's adverse reactions on the insert. So they know it exists. But the mind is not responding to truth. The mind is responding to how it's been conditioned. So the fact that it says adverse reactions don't exist, which is an incredible thing to be able to get people to believe. But the mind filters that way. Makes sense? So the people that are responding without thinking, because truly, and one of the things is that when the mind comes up with a thought, the first question should be, is that true? Does that make sense? Is that fair? Because that thought is really just coming from all the things that you've been exposed to. It's not that you've decided to have that thought. That makes sense? It could have risen from an advert.
Yeah. Subconsciously. Yeah. It's incredibly powerful. When before we started chatting and I pressed the record button, you said cults, and I got excited because I get excited about cults. But I just find it fascinating. I mean,
Yes.
is this what we're talking about now on a bigger level?
Well,
Really,
here's the
what's
thing.
going
So
on?
this is where words are really powerful. Now, the word cult has a very negative connotation in many respects. I mean, they would talk about a cult comedy, and that would be positive. Like, in the UK, Red Dwarf was known as a cult comedy, where it had its very specific following. Now, they're not cults per se; they're just people that like that thing. Now, the way that I would phrase this, the word cult though is very descriptive, and it pretty much is that. It's what's going on is that people, and you've lots of articles about the COVID cult, etc. But you couldn't really call someone a cult member, or it wouldn't really be a very good way to open a conversation. But it's very intriguing because what we're seeing is pretty much cult mentality in some respects. So, and what's really fascinating is one aspect of the cults is projection. So I bet you nearly everyone watching this in your audience has been asked or called, oh, you've joined a cult. Okay, right, which generally is what cult members will call other people that don't join the cult. But if you asked any of those people that called you that, because we've all been called it, or many of us have, what are the behaviors of a cult? They wouldn't know. So how do they know to call you? How do they know to say you've joined a cult if they don't know what the behaviors of a cult is? Some people have a rough idea that it's just people being silly and doing all these things. But I literally got on my other screen here the top 10 traits of a cult member. Now, we could go through a few of those because they will start to resonate. And so number 1 is absolute belief in the authority. Okay, a lot of time with traditional cults, it will be a charismatic leader, okay, historically, but nothing stops it being the word science, scientism, because most of the people that believe in scientism, which is far different from science, scientism is, oh, I believe in science and I'm better than you. Okay. Real science is humbly asking questions and going, on journeys to find out the truth. But if you can't question that group, then it's not science. Okay. So what you see is this absolute belief in the authority. So unwavering belief in science. And then when you point out a few things that don't add up, for instance, there's a number of editors. One of them, I think, wrote an article saying 50% of all science papers look to be fraudulent in some way, and that's gets a bit subjective. But when you look at, I think it was 2024, 10,000 papers were retracted. Okay, that's huge. Okay, so when you start to look at that, so science has got a problem. Everyone in science knows it. I've literally spoke to editors and people who have spoke to me in confidence. I won't say their names, but this is very clear, and there's so many biases in science. But if you question anything about science on any Facebook science group or any of the other groups, you will just get the other conditioned responses. Okay, so the first thing is that the absolute unwavering belief in science, and if you don't believe this, you're an idiot. I mean, it's weird because, they don't really think about the scientific method, which is it has to be questioned. So it's a paradoxical sort of cognitive dissonance, but that's the thing. It's just a conditional response. Number two is us versus them mentality, which you'll see continuously. Oh, you're one of them. Oh, you're an idiot if you don't believe what I believe. So it creates this sort of members and non-members. So what you've had for decades, if you notice in so many of the Hollywood movies, the glorification of scientists and the glorification of science in general, which is just this conditioning to set up science as be like the new God, as it were. It's almost like it's this all-powerful, all-knowing force that you mustn't question. Okay, if you do, then you go to the science hell. Number three is really interesting: suppression of critical thinking. So cults will suppress critical thinking. I mean, the New York Times ran an article, "Don't critically think. It's dangerous." Like, we literally see in these things. So I sent an article to the scientist I know today that runs a newsletter, and he does, he points out that the science curriculum in the US is really changing and they're trying to remove critical thought, all sorts of things. Now, in this article, it had this professor that says that she's no longer allowed to run debates in her classes because it's triggering. That's the suppression of critical thought.
Belief. I mean, yeah. Wow.
Okay, so then you've got elitism and ideological purity. It's a cult.
So then again, elitism and
ideological purity. So basically, you believe in their truth is absolute, superior to all other beliefs. So if you don't believe that science answers every question and it's completely clean and pure and uncorrupt, then you're an idiot and you're a flat earther. I mean, literally, you'll get called these, even if you don't mention anything to do with the shape of the earth. You'll probably get called a Trump supporter and a Trump, like these are all pre-prepared responses.
Labels.
The incredible thing about the critical thinking, because I had a conversation with someone on Facebook recently, which, I mean, it surprised me. It's someone that I've met in person a few times, and I can't describe it as anything other than the dumbest person I've ever spoke to. Now, this person travels teaching business seminars. Now, they project onto you what they're doing. So he says, oh, you're not critically thinking about this. Well, the truth was, he didn't have a critical thinking faculty in the whole of this. So what he would do is, where's your evidence? I would post like 20 proper studies, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I'm not even going to read those. What? Like, and then he would just call me, he called me a conspiracy theorist. The first time it happened for a couple of years now, because I've learned a way to avoid getting called that. I asked him 9 times to tell me what I'd said that was conspiracy, and he just ignored the question. So basically what they're doing is that he sees himself as a critical thinker, but he won't critical think. So actually they suppress it and they pretend that they are. Saying you're a critical thinker doesn't make you a critical thinker. Doing critical thinking is what makes you. So cognitive dissonance management, this is one of the incredible ones. So this is giving them ways to work their self out of an idea that doesn't make any sense. Now, I'll give you the classic, and I guarantee you can answer the response, to understand what they're doing. So I've had my 9th jab. Okay. I've just caught COVID for the 22nd time, but what's your answer? It would have been
Oh, you put
so much worse.
oh yes, if I hadn't had
Yeah.
the intervention.
Right.
Yeah.
So what they've done is that is a predictive programmed response, so the person doesn't have to incur cognitive dissonance. So what would happen is that the person would go, hang on a minute, they had the jab, but they caught COVID, but that shouldn't happen. So that's dissonance. So then their brain would literally work away, and they may come to their senses and go, hang on a minute, this doesn't make sense. But if they pre-program them first for dissonance management, they don't have to ask themselves a difficult question. So this is why you saw tweet after post after senators and people in prominent positions saying, I've had my blah blah blah, I've just caught COVID, but I'm so grateful, otherwise it would have been so much worse. That gives the person a way out.
Wow.
It's
So
see,
that's been schemed, because now I'm
yeah,
thinking about it. So many people have said that.
yeah,
Now you've actually asked me the question. I hadn't put two and two together. So
yeah,
it's been pre-planned. That's their
yes,
answer. They've been trained to give that answer, so that
yeah.
that
So
it's a safe way out.
yeah, there's a way to think about it, is that they're looking to get someone to arrive at a certain destination. Okay. And the way to do that is to basically prepare the destination ahead of time and then get them to walk it, or have someone else walk it. Now, what's interesting when that happens is that person, there's a thing I think it's called cryptomnesia, but that person will be under the impression that they came to that conclusion themselves. Now, probably a few people are starting to think about this now, that this is why you'll see an orchestration of media, because they're conditioning people to think certain things. That makes sense. And that's why if you didn't watch the media, these people are being conditioned. So think about it like this, as a hotel. So you think about all the knowledge that you've got. You spent years and years of years. So what you do is you find information and you collate it together, and then you build a conclusion. That conclusion is based on lots of information, and then you build other conclusions on top of that conclusions. We call that the hotel of knowledge. Now, the mistake that we can often make as being people that want to show others what we consider to be more truthful aspects is that when we've built, say, a 10-story hotel and we're in the penthouse, they haven't even walked in the lobby and we're shouting down to them what we've done. Like, you try and download in 10 minutes what it's taken you 5 years to learn, doesn't work. We all know that. But if we haven't witnessed the other person's hotel being built through watching the media, they are suddenly in a cloud of craziness. And we're like, what the hell? So you're going to see very bizarre behavior, but it takes a lot of conditioning floor by floor. But what's interesting about the hotel of lies is it's actually not built on any foundations. Each floor is like on a house of cards. It's like a hotel of cards. So what happens is that when they come to a conclusion and then you challenge them on that conclusion, they're going to have cognitive dissonance because they're going to look inside their mind for reasons, and there is no reason in there. Now, they've shown this, that it's particularly problematic when they have an emotional response, because what they do, the general thing is they have an emotional response, they look inside their mind, they won't find anything, so they just attack you because they feel very defensive. This is why getting through to someone is a very delicate art that you can't really do if they see you as the enemy or the opposition, etc. You've literally got to be in their corner rather than in the ring with them. But the conditioning wants them to step in the ring with you. And that's why they attack you so much. And of course, you have every right to attack them back. The problem is that that's exactly what the people pushing the narrative want. Okay, so that's why you'll see that. And hopefully that will make sense. So then what you'll get is there's one that's isolation, but that's generally, where everyone was isolated and then programmed by the TV. That explains why they didn't want the pubs, they didn't want people basically thinking for themselves and talking to each other. Fear of reprisal, this is very key. So how many people have literally started the sentence, I'm not anti-vax, but? Okay, they have an opinion, but they don't feel that they can voice that opinion. So they first have to qualify it,
Mm.
etc. So that's fear of reprisal. So I know of one WhatsApp group where I think a friend's sister was in there, and someone posted. It was a large group, and I think they were mainly females. I think they were all females actually. And one of them posted that they were having problems with their menstrual cycle following the vaccination, and they said, I'm not anti-vax, but blah blah blah. And then of course everyone else said, yeah, me too, me too. Like I'm having that, I'm having that. And of course, that's how that fear of reprisal keeps these barriers up from people being able to talk to each other about what's really going on. Number 9, emotional manipulation. I mean, the love bombing. I mean, that's about love bombing. Basically, that was the hero worship. So that was a love bombing for those. And of course, because those people, the people that were considered I mean, think about that. Key workers, like everyone else isn't a key worker. I mean, how ridiculous. Like every job's key to something, certainly that person's income. But those people were so hero worshipped that it's very then difficult for the ones that are not critically thinking to question what they're doing. And those that did got hounded out, fired, all sorts of things. And then number 10 is denigration of outsiders. And I don't think we need to go into that. That's basically the abuse that anyone that dared question the narrative would go through. Yes, you see, it's very, very incredible. And then, of course, there's a bit here which we're working on, which is why cult members believe their truth is absolute. So you've got, the leaders will just keep pounding them with this is the truth and this is follow the science, and anyone that don't believe this is a conspiracy theorist. Which incidentally now is, when you think about it, they did, and the news would go 5G conspiracy theory, 5G. So they're basically creating those two words together. So the minute you ask a question, you just get this parroted autopilot response. Oh, blah, blah, blah. And that's what's going on.
That was planned, wasn't that created by the CIA? Wasn't that the conspiracy theorist
The term itself, yeah.
Yeah.
It's in fact, it's coming back to that cognitive dissolution management or resolution dissonance, because what it is saying, if you dare don't buy the official line, then you're basically a bad person. And of course, people move away from that. Now, what's interesting, if you look through any of the TV programs, because I used to really like Sherlock, the US program. I love the character Sherlock, or the fictional works. The American version is pretty good. It's pretty entertaining, but it is loaded with conditioning. So any time that there's a conspiracy theorist character, Sherlock will look down on them and consider them to be below him, and they're not critical thinkers. But that character will generally be very overweight. They're of a low IQ. They've usually got a disability, and they usually are not articulate in any way. So basically, as you're watching this, like remember with the Jack Reacher scene, the brain's just going, conspiracy theorist, stupid person. So once they've pre-prepared that meal or pre-prepared that label, then along comes, when someone says this, just attach that label to them. And that's why you'll see all these things, racist and far right and all these things, because so much time and energy and money has been spent preparing those labels. So the minute someone says anything you don't want to say, you just stick that label on them, and then people just ignore them.
It would be a really good game, wouldn't it? If once you know this and you know what to look for, I think there should be a competition so we could all sit and watch a drama.
Well, you've just alluded to what's coming.
Go on then. Tell me more.
So there's an article going in the Light this month around the introduction to propaganda, and then we've got a propaganda bingo game coming. Okay, so you'll have your card, and then you'll just watch some of the, pretty much anything, and then you just mark off the propaganda you spotted, and then you get a line or a house. So
it's great. I mean, that's great, because I think that's why a lot of people that don't know what's going on, you've got to be really mindful of watching the TV, because like you say, they are programming us through television. And I remember my dad saying years ago, they used to give you hypnotic things. They banned it, didn't they? I think they would give, what's the term?
You're talking about subliminal.
That's the word. Yeah, subliminal messages, wouldn't they? And I think they banned it. I don't know if they.
Well, but this is interesting. Well, there's an interesting story about this, because they claim that the original, because it was there was a guy that said he put subliminal images in a cinema in US, and then it was in the book The Hidden Persuaders. Now later on, the guy claimed that it was a fake. He didn't do it, which is interesting in itself because it's questionable. But subliminal is very much a thing. There's actually a book called Subliminal by Leonard Malogno that's really good. But effectively, it's...
Sorry, David, say that again because Bonnie's barking.
got two of them
So I
now.
missed the name. Yeah.
So
what was the book?
The book's called Subliminal by Leonard Malogno. Now, and there's a bunch of books similar to it. And what we're talking about is unconscious influence. So, so what you have is subliminal is really something that your mind is exposed to, but doesn't make it to conscious awareness. Now, as we spoke about that sort of cocktail party effect, that when your name is mentioned, you become conscious of it. But what's going on is that your brain is actually absorbing all the other information. So people like Derren Brown, and there's a gentleman in the US, he does Magic for Humans, and many of these other mind magicians, we may call them, do certain tricks where they expose the unconscious mind to lots of information, but not the conscious mind. And then they can predict what that person is going to do, whether it be choose it. Like there was one where Derren Brown did it in Hamleys, where he got the woman to choose a giraffe. Now, even when she walked in the door, he said, so what he did was he made a thing with his hand like a giraffe. So he did his arm like that. He said, we're just going to go up the stairs and spot some things. So what he's doing, so she didn't pick that up. And then he said the word giraffe. I think he said, giraffe, get here okay. And so then then there's all these pictures all subliminally. And then she chooses the giraffe. Okay. And she thinks she's chosen that. But you see, I think the reason that our mind does that is basically protection and survival. So if you're going along somewhere and then suddenly you realize you're really hungry, your mind will remember, oh, there's some apple trees back there. So it's scanning the environment to protect you. But of course, once the people pushing narratives are aware that people won't process it consciously, then they can be conditioned without their awareness. And it becomes stealth influence. So then people are absolutely convinced they're not being influenced. And that's the biggest challenge, because then they're vulnerable to influence if they don't realize it happens. So I won't watch much TV, hardly at all, maybe some football or whatever, even though I get a bit annoyed because all the advertising boards are spinning with all these different adverts, and I know my mind is absorbing, but I can't consciously control. But I'll share a study with you that really shows, in fact, I'll ask you a riddle first. And if you already know the answer, just say so. But basically, there's a father and a son in a car crash. Okay. The father dies. The son's in the hospital. In walks an old surgeon and says, that's my son. How is that possible?
How is it possible, David?
The surgeon's the mother.
Oh.
Right? But your brain, and everyone does,
Yeah.
I've asked female surgeons this riddle and they haven't got it.
Wow.
So when I said old surgeon, your brain pictured a man.
Old
and
man.
then it got stuck because it couldn't work out that there's two men. In fact, the surgeon was a woman. So what's going on is that all the information, and the word old is very important there, because if I just said surgeon, then there's a good chance that people would realize. But old surgeon, men. So
and why is that though? Why? Because women get old. Why is that? Why do we associate old with the male surgeon, and not female?
Because the stereotype that. So what's going on? So that's the IAT. That's your implicit association test. So your unconscious reasoning. Now, what happens is that the information. So that's riddle is revealing what's in our unconscious mind. So you have a stereotype, the same as pretty much everyone. Only 15% of people get that riddle correct. The interesting thing is, I've not met one of those 15%. Okay, so
well, if you'd asked me off camera, I'd have got it.
Yeah, maybe. But everyone, literally,
not
a single person I've asked has got that correct. Okay, and I've asked quite a few people. So That's showing you what's in the unconscious mind. Okay. Now, what happens is your thinking is based on that, but you don't know it's based on that. You only realized when we showed you. So when you thought, so now you can see an unconscious bit of your mind. Now, here's what else happens. So they did this study, and it's called the two rope study. They put people in a room, and then they've got a puzzle. Okay, now the solution to the puzzle requires swinging one of the ropes over to the other rope. Okay, now only about 30% of people get the solution to the puzzle. So then what they do is the study organizer walks into the room and he knocks the rope with his arm. Okay, giving an unconscious clue. Then another 30% of people got the answer, but they couldn't articulate that it was because of the guy knocked the rope. So what's happened is the unconscious mind, it's a bit like Archimedes with the Eureka. He sits in the bath and the water rises and then suddenly he realizes. So that's what's happened, but the person hasn't made the connection in the bit of data that caused that. So because they know that unconscious data will cause conclusions, they can on purposely, they being anyone that wants to influence another person and knows how to, place information in the surrounding or even in language to get the person to come to a certain conclusion. Now, a very good presenter will do this ethically by building up a series of ideas bit by bit, using truth, so then the person can arrive at the right conclusion. That's good presenting or good influence. But if the person is lying about those component pieces, or even if they might be misled, but the person's going to end up the wrong conclusion. So if I can just touch on one other study just to highlight this. And they replicate this in so many different ways, by the way. One supermarket, they had French wine and German wine, equal parts of the shelf. One day they played French music, the next day they played German music. When they played French music, the sale of the French wine went up to 76%. When they played German, similar. So the music's affecting the decision, but it wasn't making it to conscious awareness. So when they were asked, did the music have any effect? Only one person even I think heard the music, but then denied it had no effect. So you see how powerful this becomes, because the person are being influenced, but they don't know why, and they even when they're prompted, they then deny it.
Do you know the music thing just took me back a good few years. We went to Spain on one of these timeshare holidays. They invite you, for a
Yeah.
free holiday, and then they try and sell you a timeshare. And we were adamant, no, 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 we're not. But the psychology behind it and the music had a lot to play with. When we thought, oh, that's a really nice house. Oh, well, let me bring in the next manager. And the next manager came in, and we were going up this pyramid, and they started to make us feel more important. And then I was listening to the music in the background, and I think it was happy. It was Earth, Wind and Fire. I just remember. But the music, each time we went up another level, the music corresponded with that. In the end, we signed. We actually signed. We went away and we thought, what happened? We managed to get out of it. We said we don't want it. We got out of it. Now our friends did the same thing after us. They went on a similar holiday, and we said, whatever you do, don't sign, because they're playing music. They'll give you champagne. They'll give you a manager. What did they do? They signed. Even they knew in advance. It's so powerful. It's kind
But
of
this is the thing.
marketing, but it's so powerful.
Yeah, but it takes you. We've got to be wise enough to say when we've been influenced. Okay, and that's what Mark Twain said. It's easy to fool someone they're convinced they've been fooled.
Yeah,
I remember
absolutely.
going to Petticoat Lane when I was 17. You ever seen those things where they sell a few things to their friends and then they're selling them for really cheap? They create this. I basically ended up buying this camera, which I didn't want a camera. Like in the heat of all the emotions, I've sitting there with this thing thinking, how the hell did that happen? And fortunately enough, I just said to go, look, I'm not going to leave here until you give me a refund. So the next lot are going to see it but this is the thing. We to have absolute certainty that we can't be influenced is one of the problematic things, because just look in your fridge, look in your wardrobe, look at the things that you've bought, and be really honest with ourselves. Do we all? I mean, go shopping when you're hungry and see how much you spend. The supermarkets know this stuff to a T. So part of my philosophy is, if we can make most people aware what's going on, then it loses its power. And then people then start to ask, well, if they've made me believe that, what is the intention of the person making me want to believe that? and then it reveals a lot of the bad intentions, the liars, and the agendas. Because you'll start, you know, and I'm sure a lot of viewers will know that you've only got to stand back a bit and look how these things start to connect.
That was what I was going to ask you actually. Why is this happening, and kind of who benefits? What's the reason behind what's, you know,
Well,
what's just gone on in the
those that
last
have
5 years?
power want more power, pretty much, you know. So when you look at, I think what's going to happen, and I've watched a few things on this, that technology is going to get to the point, in a positive way, that we can pretty much. I mean, I rewired my old house using YouTube videos, right? I just got an electrician in to come and tell me what to do. And then basically, so we have the ability to, I wouldn't always advise it, but that was fortunate. That one went well. I actually, another time I managed to trigger the immobilizer on my car. So talking to experts can be very useful as long as the experts telling you the truth. They're not lying and they're not cheating you and all these things. But we are having the ability to have such, you know, access to technology that a lot of the power structures will lose their powers. So of course, you know, to completely lock things down and to control and own everything is really just a megamaniac's dream, isn't it? You know, and I think that's what's going on.
It is.
And then you'll see a lot of the agendas, because you need a problem to create the reaction to sell the
Yeah.
product or solution. So that's why you're seeing this very coordinated, conditioned response. This ideas, I mean, it's herd mentality, which isn't in itself, herd mentality isn't itself a bad thing. The reason that antelope hang around together because it's safer to do so. You
Yeah.
know, we have these
Yeah.
instincts, but the problem is we're being played. And because we're being so played, we're not being shown how we work. So then we don't have the accurate picture. And then somebody else is controlling us to such a degree that we're not aware. I mean, I've started to spot things in my own mind, which I'm like, wow. And some of them are not particularly pleasant. Like one of them I've realized is that we've been conditioned to dislike homeless people. Okay. And when you really think about it, this person is down on their luck. You know, they've probably had some horrible things happen to them, some trauma, and then they're getting judged by someone in a suit, you know, and sometimes comedy can really break you through. And Billy Connolly literally did it for me, where some woman, he's talking about a woman that's looking down her nose at a homeless person having a cigarette and saying, oh, should be spending their money better. And then Billy's turning around and said, God's sake, woman, let the man have a cigarette where he decides where he's going to sleep tonight. I was like, wow, yeah. And then you realize, why do I have this feeling? And that feeling's there because we've been conditioned. Okay. So then the ability, I think, is really powerful, is just to question your own thoughts and feelings about things. And then you'll suddenly notice, well, should I really feel this way? Is it truth? And then when you get, and this is where it gets really key, when you start to think about yourself, how you think about yourself. I have yet to meet a client, because I do one-on-one with clients to show them how to change belief systems. I have yet to have a client that didn't have the belief I'm not good enough. Okay, it's literally universal across the board. For a start, the belief doesn't make any sense, like semantically. At what? Did you get dressed today? Did you drive today? Did you so you're good enough for all those things. But it's just this really free floating like idea that it's one of those, remember that Hotel of Lies? It's that has no foundation to it, but it feels very real and strong, and it will really affect a person's life.
Powerful stuff, David.
It is. On that note, can I bring one thing up, which me and you were involved in, which was, because I don't think I've told you about it, but basically the kickback from that was crazy. You remember we did that Zoom to do which was a fair thing to do, wasn't it? So
Yes.
I'll just give a minute. I won't give any
Yes.
names or anything else, but basically a situation arose where somebody was being questioned about, you know, their background and whether they were true to what they were doing.
Integrity.
Exactly. And then rather than do the sort of witch hunts and all this, was it your few people organised?
I arranged. Yeah, I arranged it with it. I think there were 6 of us, and you were the mediator. Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
this was the thing. I was asked to be a mediator, right? So then I thought, right, well, I've got to be impartial, and then you just let the truth arise. Okay. One of the people on that call subsequently sent me some very abusive emails. Okay. Didn't identify themselves to begin with. and like literally felt that they should be Judge Dredd. They should be the, the jury, the judge, and the executioner. And I basically asked them. They sent me some really nasty emails, and I just asked them where their evidence was and why they're thinking that. And then I realised it was from that Zoom call, and I was like, but I was just literally just getting people to talk to each other. But
Neutral. Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
this is the problem. And then they're spreading all these things out there about people. And this is the problem because the people pushing the narrative know that throw enough of this mud and some of it sticks. And everyone, and I've been more fortunate than most that that's happened very rarely to me. But it was very unsettling. And, and those people out there that are acting in good faith and honor and they're getting attacked, I can just imagine how unsettling that
Yeah,
is.
how it feels. No, I know several. It's devastating because it goes beyond the mind and it manifests in something physical, and people get ill from it. And I know who I think I know who you're referring to because a similar thing happened to me. I started getting some emails from certain people on the back of that, and I was just trying to bring it to light, allowing this situation for people to discuss it. I said, let's talk about it. But as
Yeah.
grown adults, we couldn't.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem with what's going on. If we are trying to make this world a better place, I think it's very difficult because people haven't done their shadow work, their inner work, to be a little bit kinder to each other. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and she was absolutely convinced she was in the right, and I just asked her to back any evidence up because it was literally just because I'd asked people to be respectful in that cause. Suddenly, I support one side or the other.
yeah,
No, like if someone's doing something wrong, yeah, they need, they need to pay for it. But this is the problem we face because each mind, if we've watched TV and we've gone to school, there's a good chance that we've been made to believe things that aren't true. So like here's a really key thing. So there's a really good book called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, and he quotes a study where they were studying the mindsets of wealthy people versus poor people. Now, wealthy people feel confidence when they break rules. The poor person feels wrong. So in a school where where parents in the school teaching that breaking the rules is immoral, okay, because it's not necessarily immoral, it depends on the thing, right? So basically, if you go back 50, 60 years, doing the right thing was breaking the law, but you don't realize that, and that's why so many of the civil rights movement, all these things have come, but there are so many of them being hijacked now, and that's what's key. So the unconscious mind is literally, a metaphor I like is like a horse. It's going to move towards pleasure, it's going to move away from pain. So if they can convince us what we want is painful or wrong, we're going to move away from it. And that's one of the greatest hijacks of those people that want peace and want freedom and want autonomy, is that if you feel a conflict, it's probably because you're unconsciously been conditioned to go away from that which you really want. Makes sense. And there's a number of people that are now talking about people that have been programmed to be poor and all these things. And it's quite possible, and in fact likely, from my opinion, that's what's happened. And someone that spent a lot of time on my own beliefs, that I had been holding myself back even up to a few years ago and not really aware that I was doing it. So I knew it was important to do this project, and I went to lengths to do it, and I even had to sell my house to fund things and do all this. But then when I would get good opportunities to, teach workshops and books and all these things, I'd moved away from them without realizing. And that's my programming. That makes sense. And that's where, for me, when this comes to conscious awareness, when when the shadow sees the light, then I think everything changes.
yeah, yeah. So there is hope.
Oh, well, there's
There is
plenty of
hope.
hope. Well, here's
Yeah,
here's the way I look at it. We're in a sort of battle of some sorts, okay? But we've been hijacked and we also don't know our power. Okay, so in fact, from that perspective, we are untapped in our ability and our resources. And one of the things is this common belief, you say, oh, it's too big, there's no point. And then there's a beautiful story around starfishes where there's a little boy on a beach, and there's like hundreds and thousands of starfish have been washed up. and he's picking one up and he's walking it back and he's putting it in the water. And then an adult comes along and says, "What are you doing?" So I'm putting the starfish in. He says, "Oh, what's the point? There's thousands of them. It doesn't matter." He says, "It matters to this one." Okay. So if all of us do one, and this is the thing we say, like, just do one thing. And then you got people say, "Oh, don't be silly, you do one thing. What difference will that make?" Well, it will make the difference in that one thing. But the power is that when you do that one thing, you'll start to see yourself as having more power, and then you'll get more power, and then it's a domino effect. And the studies show this. It's called self-perception theory. In fact, this is how they moved people from being caring about freedom to goose step by goose step. Because what happens is when you do something, you kind of observe your own behavior unconsciously, and you start shifting your belief systems. And that's what they did. They got people to go from freedom to basically laughing at freedom. You literally on question time, somebody told me about this. Somebody had questioned censorship, and the audience laughed at them. Like that's the power conditioning that 1984 is. It's bit by bit.
That's when it's scary. Yeah.
But the power's within.
The power's within and without, and like you say, just doing our bit. This will be a little starfish, a little light, and I totally agree. And as I always say, I think it's exciting times that we're living in. It's very spiritual, it's biblical, it's scary, depending on your perception. It doesn't have to be scary at all. But I think if those of us that do know what's going on, we've all got to do a little bit and encourage others to wake up and do their little bit.
Yeah.
Sorted.
The opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, I was rudely made aware of how the world worked in 2004, maybe 5, just start off by Ed Griffin. I basically went to see one of his seminars, and then I got so curious. In a couple of months, I pretty much watched every documentary I could find. And then trying to talk to people for the next 15 years was impossible. Okay, and then over the last 5 years, more people have become aware than I could imagine.
Yeah.
It's a one-way street. Okay,
then it wasn't such a lonely place, because I hear what you're saying. When you kind of knew something wasn't quite right, and you were awake many years ago, and you talked to people, you couldn't really. They just thought you a bit balmy. And then suddenly, that was one positive thing of what's happened in this last 5 years, and that's when I set up the Freedom Network, and all these people came out the woodwork, and I thought, yes. So and more are. There's just constantly, and the younger people, there's a lot of awareness coming out. So exciting.
Yeah, and that's why we like the project, reachingpeople.net project, is dedicated to showing people how behavior works, how you can navigate the obstacles to reaching someone, and literally how you can message much more effectively so it gets through. And that's the key, because the truth movement, using that term loosely, doesn't have an information problem. It has a communication problem. Okay, and once it can transfer one idea from you to someone else and they can get it, that's when they're going to change their mind. But you can't tell them, because telling them is literally giving them that floor with no foundations. But if you show them, and I would advise people to really look into that term, because it's very popular in literature and TV study, which is show, don't tell. So if I said to you, it's safe, okay, but you've got a totally different experience, that makes no difference. But if I said to you, oh, well, I've got this study in blah, 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 that's a totally different way to approach it. So don't give people conclusions. Take them through some of the information so they then arrive at the conclusion. That's one of the real key bits.
Yeah, they've got to think for themselves again, haven't they, really? That's the answer, but encourage them to do that and help them.
Absolutely.
How can people reach you then? Through your website still?
Yes, so reachingpeople.net. There's we do free Zooms roughly every couple of weeks, and if you scroll to the bottom of the homepage, you can sign up for that. You can also drop me an email at info@reachingpeople.net. I'm on plenty of podcasts. I mean, on the free Zooms, you can turn up and ask me any question you have, and I'll do my best to answer it. And yeah, we've done a lot of podcasts, a lot of articles, and we've really just finished a really big important piece of the research, which we're going to start pushing out now, to the point where people will be able to predict someone's response. And when they get skilled enough that they won't trigger that response, they will trigger maybe them getting a bit curious and other things, and yeah, and that's when we can really see some change.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me, Wise Women Weekdays. It's been great catching up with you, and wish you all the best. And I'm sure our paths will cross sometime in the future,
Absolutely.
wherever, we're all wandering. Who knows? But yeah, thank you very much, David, and I wish you well. And the dogs have gone quiet. What have you done with them?
Yeah, they're just sitting on the floor relaxed. I think I just turned around and got them moving again.
I've got to go and feed mine now. Anyway, I wish you all the best, David,
Thank you, Karen.
and yeah, you take care. Oops. Have I lost you? Sorry, I'm trying to turn off the button and I pressed the wrong one. Let's end record and stop.